Welcome to the Press Club of Long Island's conversation with Brian Stelter about his new book, Network of Lies, the Epic Saga of Fox News, Donald Trump, and the Battle for American Democracy. My first introduction to Brian was when he appeared in the documentary Page One inside the New York Times, and he's done so much since then. He's the author of 3 New York Times bestselling books, Top of the Morning, Hoax, and Network of Lies. Previously, he was the media reporter at the New York Times, the chief media correspondent for CNN Worldwide, and the anchor of Reliable Sources for CNN. He is currently a special correspondent for Vanity Fair and a Walter Shorenstein Fellow at Harvard Kennedy's School Shorenstein Center on Media Politics and Public Policy. He's a producer on the Apple TV Plus series The Morning Show, which is inspired by his first book, Top of the Morning. And he also executive produced the HBO documentary After Truth, Disinformation, and the Cost of Fake News. If I have my timeline correctly, today, Brian was on The View. Yesterday, he appeared on BBC, News Nation, and MSNBC. We understand that he is in demand, and we appreciate him joining us. So I'm going to dive into some questions based on having finished Brian's new book this week, and you can drop questions into the chat if you'd like me to ask them on screen a little later in the event. And Brian, before I dive into questions, do you want to make any remarks?
Thank you for having me. Thank you to the Press Club. I love the Press Club of Long Island. I love journalism organizations. We need more of them. We need them to be healthy and vibrant. It's how we're going to all get through crazy periods in our industry. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. And to dive right in, I'm kind of just going right into it immediately the way I prepared these. So sorry to start with a long one. So one of the tactics employed by Tucker Carlson that you write about is to post the names of reporters, make insinuations that they did something unethical, particularly something that would go against journalism ethics. Yeah. And then without directly telling his followers to go harass those reporters, they go and harass those reporters and even threaten those reporters. Right. It seems to be a way to exact revenge on anyone who engages in critical reporting and is designed to have a chilling effect on free speech. Yeah. In your experience, does that work?
Does it work? No, I don't think it does. I think it's disturbing. I think it's upsetting. I think it triggers meetings in newsrooms. It causes conversations with editors. It causes discussions about how to push back against this climate of hate and hostility. But no, I don't think it works. I guess I'm an unusual example because I've known Tucker Carlson for almost 20 years. I've covered him as a media reporter. I've also been a guest on one of his shows. We've been to dinner, the whole 9 yards. Of course, in recent years, I think he radicalized. I think he became unglued from the shared reality that most of us accept. And so he and I don't talk anymore. But, on his television show, when he would call me a eunuch, when he would, say all sorts of nasty things, I learned to brush it off. I think the difference is for a journalist who's not in that world on a daily basis, who suddenly gets an avalanche of hate mail and harassment, it can be very disorienting. And I think, I mentioned the importance of having press clubs. That's why we need organizations and leaders that can help people through those moments, that make people feel like they're not alone. If you're, it's not just Fox, it's not just Tucker. If you're suddenly on the receiving end of some, campaign against you, it can be really head spinning. But, I think for the most part, no, it does not discourage journalists. It causes them to double down. And I think some news outlets have gotten better in the last few years of having support for journalists who are suddenly receiving a lot of harassment and hate in terms of helping them lock down their accounts, helping them sift through all the messages, giving them even a little bit of time off. There's been some progress on that front. I think that's valuable. But I think we should recognize why the likes of Tucker Carlson do what they do. They do what they do because they want to have a chilling effect on the discourse. They want to make it harder to report and engage. They want this environment to be less open and free and vibrant. Look, it's what drives a lot of what Fox says. Fox all day long tells you that the rest of the media is fake and bad. And obviously it's a lot more complicated and different than that. But that's a narrative that's designed for them to sell more ads, to get more viewers, get more eyeballs, to get more people hooked. And I think it's important that we kind of resist that and we fight back against it.
So A dichotomy that you raise in the book is that on one hand, you have TV hosts telling viewers, you could trust me and only me because everyone else is lying to you. And then
Right.
on the other hand, you have court filings and you have lawyers saying, how could anyone think this was anything but entertainment?
Hmm.
And I think they hope that that only happens in a courtroom and that everybody else doesn't catch wind of that. But people like you make sure we catch wind of that. Is that ever a successful legal argument?
Well, you're referring to that famous 2020 case where Fox's lawyers did successfully defang a defamation case by saying, yeah, viewers know what Tucker is. They know what he's doing. He's engaging in hyperbole. He's entertaining them. He's, and that did succeed in 2020, but on a very in a narrow way, in a smaller case. It clearly did not help Fox in this monster case by from Dominion. And Dominion is why I had to write this book. Dominion was able to unearth secrets from Fox that had been buried for years. It's the first time I've ever seen a major media company exposed in this way, with reams of emails and texts and memos all forced into public view. And believe it or not, I have a little sympathy for Sean Hannity and Laura Ingraham and Rupert Murdoch, like all these figures who thought they were emailing privately, whose messages are now splashed into public view. Some of my text messages got swept up in the Dominion case. And I hate it. It was weird. It was an uncomfortable feeling. So I have a little sympathy. But that said, I think these revelations are important. They have taught us a lot about how Fox works. They've taught us a lot about the incentive structures in the right-wing media. They've showed us a lot about the entertainment aspect of this versus the news aspect. And so that's why I had to write it all down. It was too gripping not to.
That was actually one or even two of the questions I was going to ask. That feeling where you're pouring through documents. I don't know if someone else told you first, like, hey, you're in here, or you just found it yourself. But you have a trove of documents, and then here you find your own text message or your own email.
Yeah.
And, as a reporter, I understand if I write maybe a government official, that could get swept up in a FOIL
Right.
case.
Right.
But I don't think that my private emails are going to get out there. And you weren't saying anything bad. You were doing your job. But as you mentioned, that felt uncomfortable.
It's definitely an eye-opening thing, and it's good for all of us here on Zoom to think about. Increasingly, we all have to operate on the assumption that our messages will be swept up somewhere, somehow, some way, right? Whether it's a hacker or whether it's a legit legal proceeding, got to figure that what you're texting might be read by everybody at some point. And I've taken that to heart as a result of this case. As you said, I was texting with the head of Fox News PR asking basic questions. But I also would argue with her and get into debates with her and ask questions right before my show on Sunday morning. And there's a really funny text from her in November of 2020 where she says, I'm too busy right now screaming at Stelter via text, because it was like I was right about to go on TV and she wanted her point of view heard. Now, my view on this is, if I'm about to go on TV and talk about Fox in my role as a media reporter, I want to know what the head of Fox PR says. Of course, I want to hear from her. Her name is Irina Briganti. I want to know as much as I can from her. So I'm happy to be yelled at. And I feel like I give as good as I get sometimes when I'm talking to PR people. So I didn't mind that one bit, but there were other messages. I didn't even put them in the book from executives who were shocked that I had a leak from Fox. And they're like, how did Stelter get this leak? And it was just so interesting as a reporter. And I think you all probably many of you can relate to this, to see how your sources or your subjects are reacting to your reporting was a very interesting and surreal experience. The context for this is November of 2020, 4 days into election week. We're all waiting for the projection to find out if Biden's going to be president. And, remember how the counting was going on for days. And I reported on Friday morning that there were some memos inside Fox, various departments of Fox, that said, hey, when he becomes president-elect, when Biden's projected to be president-elect, don't use the term president-elect because Trump's still arguing in the courts, so we don't know what's going to happen. And I thought this was BS. A lot of staffers thought it was BS. That's why some of them leaked the memos to me. But then later through Dominion, I see the messages where these executives are freaking out, be like, how did our memos leak? And it was such a great feeling because, and again, many of you can relate to this, to see the subjects of your story confirm your story. Not that I doubted it, not that I thought I was wrong, but it was a really interesting feeling to see it affirmed like that. So anyway, it was a surreal thing. Um, but the texts about me are pretty irrelevant. The key part here is hundreds, thousands of messages between the biggest stars on Fox and the biggest executives in at the company, and to be able to see how they operate and how they think was and is, I think, really revealing.
Hmm. So, with this trove of documents getting released by virtue of a lawsuit, before this happened, I had no idea that the discovery process could be this thorough. Where I know
Oh,
in a
yeah.
in a criminal suit, you don't have to give over things that would incriminate yourself to some extent, right? You have a right against self-incrimination, and it seems like here they just were forced to incriminate themselves through a civil lawsuit. Is there anything comparable to this where you've gotten or anybody's gotten this much access to internal documents because of a lawsuit?
I do think this is it's not unprecedented in terms of getting access to internal emails. I think there's two differences though. One is Fox is a very public facing company. So having access to these emails then triggered a lot of follow-up news coverage, right? And number two, and this is like really important and I think underappreciated, Dominion worked really hard and really strategically to make sure some of these emails and text messages saw the light of day. Because it's one thing for lawyers to go through the discovery process and read a million emails and find a few nuggets of gold. It's another thing for them to strategically decide we are going to make sure these 700 documents are all included in our public filing, all included in our exhibit list for trial. Even though we're not going to get to trial because they're going to settle, right? Dominion pushed it as far as they possibly could, putting as much of this into the public realm as they possibly could, which obviously benefits reporters like yours truly, who could then use the materials. But I do think it also benefits the public more broadly. And that was part of Dominion's strategy. And I've interviewed the lawyers about this. Yes, they wanted a boatload of money, and they won a boatload of money. But they also wanted public accountability, public scrutiny of Fox's practices. And they could only win that by pushing this material into the public view. So basically, the judge in the case said, okay, you can file your summary judgment briefs, which is one of the final pretrial steps, 45,000 words. Whatever the word count he gave, they made sure they added every word, right? They were going to fill their public filings with these messages. And then with the exhibits that were filed for trial, they made sure to file hundreds and hundreds of exhibits. And that's really what I used as the material for this book. There are still a lot of emails that we'll never get to read because they were redacted, they were kept secret, they were private. But I've been told by Dominion's lawyers, they were able to force almost all of the most important information into public view. And I think if any, it's as much of a PR strategy for them, right, as a legal strategy. Yes, let's be honest, they were trying to embarrass Fox, but they were also trying to show how the big lie was born. And I think they did succeed in doing that.
And I think you acknowledged in your book that they really gave out more than they needed to. Things they put in there, not because it would have helped them win the case, but because they wanted reporters to find it.
Totally. It didn't matter to the legal case that Tucker Carlson said he hated Donald Trump. I mean, listen, I'm sure some lawyer will tell you how it could possibly be relevant, but give me a break. This case was about state of mind from Maria Bartiromo, Lou Dobbs, Rupert. Tucker Carlson barely factored in. It didn't really matter what he was saying behind the scenes about Trump. But Dominion knew that was going to get headlines, and Dominion believed it got to a deeper truth, which was about hypocrisy, about saying one thing on the air and another thing off the air. And that's a very true dynamic, and it's not just applicable to Fox. It's true elsewhere as well. We should want and we should expect our broadcasting, industry leaders, right, to be honest and to be consistent. And I think Dominion showed how that wasn't true at Fox.
There's both sidesism that's thrown around between the cable networks, and I think the Dominion lawsuit, I think, really threw that out. of the window. You can't really say that these networks are all the same anymore. And a big reason why I left with that impression was there were conversations going on between a candidate or the president and media stars and executives and owners and just everybody up and down the flagpole, where do those things happen at an MSNBC? Do those things happen at a CNN?
Right.
Is Biden on the phone with the president or CEO of any networks
Yeah.
talking to them about their coverage?
My impression is no, with maybe an asterisk that, he might, say hello to someone at a White House Christmas party. We do know that Biden likes watching Morning Joe, for example. He's been known to have a phone call with Joe Scarborough. He's been known to have a relationship with David Ignatius at the Post, Thomas Friedman, those types of columnists. But, even as I'm saying the words, I'm reaching for an equivalence that's not really there. It is a false equivalence. There is no similarity. With Fox, especially in 2017, the relationship was so tight. It was hard to see where Trump ended and Fox began. Sean Hannity really was the shadow chief of staff. Rupert Murdoch really was on the phone with Trump all the time. And while Rupert's relationship did fall apart, Rupert gave up on Trump. By 2020, he was fed up. He was pissed that Trump wasn't taking his advice about the pandemic. The two men only spoke 2 times in 2020. They've never spoken since. So that relationship is gone. But with Hannity, Hannity, he acted like he was one of the adults in the room in 2020 and 2021. He was texting Mark Meadows before January 6th saying, I'm really worried about what might happen on January 6th. I think that's a shell-shocking, jaw-dropping revelation that Sean Hannity was worried about January 6th. He didn't say that on the air. He didn't warn his viewers. He didn't tell them to stay home. We still to this day don't know what Trump and Hannity talked about. We don't know what Hannity knew about Trump's state of mind before and after the attack. But a few days after the attack, Hannity texted Mark Meadows, the actual chief of staff, and said, we need to, we have a clear path to land this plane in 9 days, meaning to end the Trump administration. Like, Hannity clearly thought he was actually a shadow chief of staff. He was actually in charge, and there is no equivalent to that with a CNN or an MSNBC. Sure, Fareed Zakaria knows Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, but there's not that kind of coordination that was happening at Fox. And, why does it matter? It matters because in 2024, it might happen again. And it's really interesting to watch how Hannity positions himself vis-a-vis Trump nowadays. Especially given the fact that after January 6th, Rupert Murdoch, the patriarch, said, quote, we're busy making Trump a non-person. Rupert Murdoch literally promised people that he was making Trump disappear. And as we know, that is not it. He tried for a while, but that has not happened.
And when you say disappear, you mean he was keeping Donald Trump off air and almost kind of keeping his name out of the mouths of the people that speak on air.
I think it's so interesting. I write in the book, and I try to give Trump some credit here. I say in the book, this was not a conspiracy theory that Trump had. He perceived that Fox was deplatforming him, that Fox was silencing him. He wasn't wrong. Like, that wasn't a conspiracy theory. That was an actual conspiracy. There was a conspiracy by Rupert Murdoch and the head of Fox News, Suzanne Scott, and by Sean Hannity, and by others to move away from Trump, to move the Republican Party to a new, younger generation. For a while, as you all know, it was Ron DeSantis that was the anointed one on Fox. Now, maybe it's Nikki Haley, but the truth is Fox is coming home to Trump. Hannity is coming home to Trump. He's having a town hall with Trump next week. So there was very much an effort to break with Trump. And here's what I think happened. And I'd be curious to see and hear what you all think. And I mentioned my email earlier, bstelter@gmail.com. Here's my theory on how Trump was able to come back to center stage. Because after the attack in DC, he was deplatformed. He disappeared. The American media basically erased him. Fox erased him. And then Tucker Carlson and his friends started to rewrite the history of January 6th. They started to describe it not as a riot or insurrection, but as a setup, as a con job, as a false flag, as an operation by the feds to entrap victims, Trump supporter victims, as an operation by the feds to punish Trump supporters, to trick them into invading the Capitol. There was this new story that Tucker and his allies came up with. And, you hear it all the time about Ashley Babbitt. You hear it all the time about Ray Epps, who's now suing Fox for defamation. There was this concerted effort to say Trump was not the villain. He was the victim. He was the victim of a setup. And I believe it was that story that Tucker told and others told over and over and over and over and over again that basically exonerated Trump and welcomed him back to center stage. And now we're at the point where Republican lawmakers play with this narrative. Lots of them. We've seen this again on Capitol Hill this week. Donald Trump plays with this narrative. He talked today about trying to punish some of the Capitol Hill police officers who were trying to stop the riot. There's been this wholehearted embrace of the narrative, the counter narrative of January 6th being an attack on Trump supporters instead of an attack by Trump supporters. So basically what I'm trying to argue is it was Fox and the Fox machine that, yes, deplatformed Trump, but then also re-platformed him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there was this sense of him being dead in the water for that long time, and other networks too seem to also take the cue that we don't need to be speaking about one person the whole time. There's actually more than one Republican candidate or hopeful
Right.
race, and not to mention that there's going to be Democrats in the race too.
Right.
So you mentioned in the book that an audience can be conditioned to be unable to digest the truth, and there were periods where people were leaving Fox because they didn't like that Fox was giving an accurate portrayal of January 6th, or that Fox was saying that the election was won by Joe Biden. And they started to leave, and they came back just as they've come back after other times. But if they've conditioned their own audience to be unable to digest the truth, it seems like they're priming them to go to a network that is even more outlandish, even less tethered to reality, and almost creating their own problem. They're making an audience that is just primed to tune into Alex Jones and to give up on whoever replaces Tucker Carlson.
Right. That's really interesting. So you're saying they're the top of the funnel, and they're bringing them down further into the realm of Newsmax and Steve Bannon's War Room. I think there is some truth to that. But at the same time, Fox has this incredible and unique stranglehold on the Republican base audience. And maybe that's just because they were the first movers. They have the first mover advantage. They've been there 25 years. Partly it's that they have higher production values. They put on a better show. They spend more money on it. They make more profits. They're able to fund a better show. Partly, I think it's they've sold Fox not just as a network, but as a lifestyle, as a way of life, as an all-encompassing brand, a cultural brand. And Newsmax just can't compete with that. So, Fox still is dominant, but it's true that there are all these other players, including some that are even further to the right, even further into that swamp of right-wing talk and rhetoric. And, none of them, Newsmax on its own does not really threaten Fox. Steve Bannon on his own does not threaten Fox. But when you add them all up, they are a significant competitive layer. They are a significant competitive space. Now, here's what frustrates me as a reporter. None of these places spend a lot of time producing actual journalism. And that's where I see a market opportunity. That's where the opportunity is. Fox is a relatively small news operation, very big talk show operation. Newsmax, even smaller news operation, huge talk shows. So, the question becomes, is there an appetite in the Republican Party or on the right for real reporting, for news, for investigative journalism, for scoops, for breaking news? Or is the appetite only for resentment news, for grievance, or for hate news, for talking about the news that others are breaking? I unfortunately lean toward the view that there's not really a market. There's not really much of an appetite, but I'd love to see people try. I'd love to see there be more attempts at putting the news back in Fox News.
Right. And that speaks to another question that I prepared, which is it possible to be a biased network or biased media personality and also be credible?
Yes, I think it is. Well, so the word biased is what gives me the heebie-jeebies a little bit. Because first of all, there's a negative connotation. I think we all bring our own biases to the world around us. One of my biases is that I want to have as diverse and broad a cable news world as there is. I think there should be 10 cable news channels, not 5, right? Like, we all have biases. Most of them don't matter, but we all bring our own lived experience. So I would reframe it a little bit and say, can you have a perspective and a point of view and still be credible? And I think the answer is a resounding yes. Audiences increasingly want people on television to bring a point of view, to bring a perspective, to bring analysis, because they've, for the most part, read the headlines on their phone. For the most part, they know the general gist of what happened in the day. They know, for example, that George Santos is about to be expelled. Sorry, George. They know it's about to happen, and what they want is perspective. They want context wrapped around it, and personal and provocative point of view. Now, yeah, is that a bias? Of course, totally. Those hosts are biased, but to me, that it's about adding value on top of that base layer of information that people already know. And I think when I look at what Rachel Maddow does on MSNBC, when I look at I don't want to call out former colleagues of CNN, but I think when you see anybody on TV doing a monologue, adding on top of base news coverage, they're adding value, and I believe they're actually adding to their credibility. Now, here's the distinction. When you get into the realm of lies and deception and misinformation, obviously that's going to erode credibility. That's why the big lie, the election lies of 2020, were so destabilizing for Fox. The network reported the truth that Biden was going to be president. The audience rebelled, and then the network panicked and tried to sell them a lie about Trump being the victim of a rigged election. And in doing so, those hosts thought they might be helping the audience, but they were hurting. Right? There's all these messages from the head of the network, from Sean Hannity, saying we need to respect the audience, but in so doing, they were actually disrespecting the audience. So I think that's the North Star, no matter what the channel is. Are you actually respecting your audience, or are you disrespecting?
And you observed in the book that political TV hosts are in an election every day, the Nielsen ratings.
Yeah.
So how does commercial television news overcome that when being accurate, fair, and thorough is perceived as boring, at least by the standards of the ratings? The incentive structure is off for both TV execs as well as the hosts.
Right. Thank you for pulling that out. I'm proud of that line, because I think I think it's something that's under recognized, that some of these television hosts, Laura Ingraham, for example, Jesse Waters, they are politicians. Like, they exist in a political environment. They seek to, they advocate for political outcomes, and they have a lot more power than the average GOP congressman. They are politicians, but instead of being elected every 2 years, they are being elected every night. The ratings are what's driving their popularity, their success, their futures. And as a result, they feel incredible pressure, more so than your average congressman, to say what the viewers want to hear, to promote what they want to promote, to believe what they want to believe. And those incentive structures are, they are quite insidious, to be honest. I felt this only a little bit at CNN, because I was on every week. I was on every Sunday. So I wasn't on every day hosting a show. And I looked at my ratings. I wanted to win. I wanted to, be the tallest kid in the class. But I did not look at the minute by minute numbers that people at Fox look at. Minute by minute numbers, looks like a line graph up and down. They drop for every commercial. They come back after every break. But you can see what guests are most popular. You can see what guests are less popular. That to me, that's fentanyl. If the average ratings are just like pot, like, to me, the much more addictive substance can be really, really damaging. And I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I to me, I look at this environment and I think, if you were looking at minute by minute ratings, trying to hold on to your audience and win re-election every day, you're going to be tugged in some darker directions.
So I'm going to go to a question that was raised by Phil in the audience. And if anybody else would like to ask a question, you could type it into the chat. And then if it's appropriate, I'll ask it. And Phil asks, Do you think Fox News has helped to condition its right-leaning audience to no longer to be able to tell the difference between fact-based reporting and talk show grievances? And if so, how do we nudge those viewers back to being able to tell that difference?
I hope this is not a dispiriting answer. I don't know if we can nudge everybody back. I guess I look at the marketplace this way. I think there is a subset of Republican voters, not the average Republican voter, of whom, I live in a community a lot like yours. Probably I live in a little beautiful red town in New Jersey, in a red county in New Jersey, but in a blue state. So not unlike a lot of areas in Long Island. And when I talk to my neighbors, my friends who are Republican voters, what I'm about to describe is not them. My friends, my neighbors, they are reality based. They want to know what's true in the world. They want to know what's real in the world. They don't want to be lied to by disinformation peddlers. But it is clear that there is a subset of Republican voters who have opted out of the media, who have opted out even of Fox, who are not coming back, who are never going to trust ABC News again, who are never going to read Newsday again. They have completely dropped out, and they've chosen instead Donald Trump and Alex Jones and Steve Bannon, and that's it. And I say with sadness, I don't think we can win those folks back. But I do think that's not the average voter, not the average Republican voter. And so how do we show others that we're credible? Well, look, I don't think my face, which has been branded by Tucker Carlson as a eunuch, is going to be the face to win people back necessarily. But I think what we can do day after day, the beauty, the thrill, the craft of journalism, helping people navigate their worlds, their lives every day, is the answer. Maybe it's fancy ad campaigns too, maybe it's PSAs, but I'm old fashioned. I think that the day-to-day work that I see from the local paper that I love, that's the work that makes me engage and care more about my community and trust local outlets more and care about my institutions. The only reason why I went and voted, in my local election at the beginning of this month, was because of the coverage from my local publications, right? Also the town Facebook page, but you know what I mean? I feel much more connected to my civic life thanks to the journalism that comes out of my community. And to me, that's trust, that builds bridges. To me, that earns trust. Not necessarily a lecture from MSNBC or CNN about why you should, rely on the media, but instead just the day-to-day work of covering what happened and telling you where to vote and telling you what's on the ballot. Do you think I make any sense, Brendan?
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I could tell you, I work for a local newspaper group, and in my experience, we have people that really love what we do,
Yeah.
regardless of their own political leanings. And then we
Right.
also have the outliers. You have people that
Right.
accuse us of being too liberal, and we have people who accuse us of being too conservative. So I get the impression that we're doing something right.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's, can I just add about that? It's all about the totality. It's all about the totality, right? It's not about any individual article or individual headline, individual tweet. You can pull out a sentence here, a sentence there. And if you want to hate the media, it's easy to hate the media based on whatever example is floating around the internet that day, based on whatever screw up is garnering attention. But it's incumbent on all of us, and I think most people are acting in good faith and are critical thinkers, to view the press, to view the media in totality, and not to react to the best or the worst any day.
I find that as somebody that works in a very local, regional publication, we really only talk about national politics if maybe we're interviewing our congressman, and generally it's because of something the congressman wanted to talk about, not
Right.
not an issue that we raised.
Right.
And that, I should say, that depends on the congressman because they change. But
Right.
um,
That's
I
true.
sometimes feel like the media gets painted with a broad brush, or at least what they call the mainstream media, which I don't think is a very useful moniker,
No, it is
because
not.
it, is the regional television that we have in New Jersey and New York and Long Island, and the
Yeah.
regional newspapers, is that the mainstream media? Because we're kind of doing our own thing, and we're not taking cues from what might be called the MSM. But there's other occasions where the national media kind of puts eggs on everybody's face. And,
That's true.
and actually, I'd love to get your opinion on something that really bothered me as just a local journalist. So a few years ago, BuzzFeed published the Steele dossier, right? And my attitude was, if you have unsubstantiated allegations that you can't substantiate, reporting on their existence can be irresponsible, because you're saying these allegations exist and we're going to let you know about these allegations, even though we can't prove whether they're right or wrong. Did you have the impression that BuzzFeed did something irresponsible in doing that?
Boy, I think I debated this multiple times on CNN, and I probably expressed different views on this as it's evolved over the years. Ben Smith, the editor of BuzzFeed, he's always defended the decision. But I remember interviewing him about it on TV and getting into a debate with him about it. Journalists, number one, have to focus on what is true. Report what is true. Report what we actually do know, not the existence of something that may or may not be true. I know Ben's argument, BuzzFeed's argument, was that the elites are able to read this message, so the rest of you should too. But that's really more of that's not a journalism argument. That's more of this is the information world we live in now argument. It's not really a journalism argument. So I guess I'd want to side on the journalism side with, let's report what we know to be true. Now, but I wrestle with this at the beginning of Network of Lies. I say, it's uncomfortable for journalists to have to deal in the realm of lies and rumors and innuendo. We are trained to deal in the realm of facts. That's what we want to do. We want to be able to separate fact from fiction. But I do come to the view that studying the lies and the liars teach us a lot about politics. So that would be my argument in favor of the BuzzFeed decision, that, knowing what was out there, knowing what was informing Trump, knowing what was informing the CIA chiefs, like that there was value in knowing what they knew, even if they didn't know whether it was true. But gosh, I don't want to give up on the space, Brendan, of we know what is real and here it is. We're going to tell you what is real today, as opposed to just throwing all the schlop up against the wall and seeing what sticks.
Right.
Ugh,
There's tough. The people are saying realm of reporting,
right,
is the thing we don't practice at our paper.
Well, and here's where I think the direction I think we're heading in as a society is a direction where, your publication, where the Times and the Post and CNN keep high walls and high standards in an environment where everything else is fair game, and outside those walls, it's going to be more chaotic than ever. Like, I look at the rise of AI-driven content. We're going to live in a world soon where most of what's on the internet is computer generated, and we have really no idea to tell if it's real or not. We're going to be in an environment where if you want to believe the worst about whomever and whatever you can, because there's going to be stories to confirm it. When I got fired by CNN, there was a fake news website that said I had been arrested by a military tribunal. It's probably the same people that put up the Zoom bombing earlier. Then 3 weeks later, that fake news website said I had been executed at Guantanamo Bay. And if you really want to believe that I was killed at Gitmo, then you can. There's an article to tell you the truth, to tell you the story about it. But I think that's the environment we're going to live in, where there's going to be unlimited lies, unlimited disinformation, as far as your mind can reach. And as a result, the high walls of our newsrooms are going to be more important than ever. It's going to actually we're going to have more value. And I don't want to say walled garden. I don't want to say castle and a moat, but you know what I'm getting at. This idea that brands that have earned trust, that are flawed, but trying to get it right, that do give a damn about what is true, are going to have more value in an environment where anything goes at any time, and you have no idea what is real when you're outside the walled garden, when you're outside the high walls. That is my, maybe that's too optimistic, but that is my take on where we're heading.
So Sharon asks,
yeah,
what do you think of newsrooms moving away from posting news on X, formerly Twitter, given the way Musk is handling it and allowing all the disinfo and extremists?
Yeah, I'm arguing about this every day with my friend Oliver Darcy, who's the Reliable Sources writer at CNN now. You know, he and I worked together for years. He has quit Twitter. He's only on Threads. He's trying to shame me into quitting Twitter as well. I can't do it. And I'll tell you why. Number one, I met my wife on Twitter. I will always love Twitter. I think it still has more upside than downside. A lot of us have built audiences there. And I don't want to, if I stop posting, if all of us give up on Twitter, it's going to become even more of a jungle. You know, I'm of the view that we should stay in the fight. But look, there are a lot of days where I think Oliver's right, and we should just quit and move on and move to Threads and move to other platforms. There's a lot of times a day where I think he's right. But I think it's an individual decision. I think I don't worry too much about the feeling that we're creating content for X, because that's true on every platform, and all the platforms have flaws. You know, we spent years covering the flaws of Facebook, the flaws of Instagram, the flaws of TikTok. But it's clearly much more intense now when it comes to this debate about X. Musk is not making it any easier for himself. And I don't know about you, but I, just for fun, I signed up for the revenue sharing. Maybe some of you have done this. You sign up on Twitter, you know, they'll cut you a check for however many views you've had over 2 weeks or a month. And like, so every 2 weeks I get a check for like $30. And in some ways it makes it's worse than zero. Like, you know what I mean? Like it makes you realize that you're working for free when you're getting only a few dollars, if you know what I mean. But again, I see a lot of upside still. I hate to bring the conversation down and be sad, but my mother passed away a couple weeks ago. And when I shared the news on Twitter, that was the primary way that I told my friends and my associates and my colleagues, like those messages reach so much more widely than, a post on Facebook. And, gosh, I'd almost given up on Twitter. And then the outpouring from people, the replies lifted me up in a way I've never felt before. So I know that's very personal. It's kind of selfish, but I'm trying to say there are still good people on Twitter. And there's still good conversations happening. And I'm still getting ideas for guests for my podcast. And so I'm loath to give up on it entirely, I guess, is the short answer to the long answer.
And I do want to express my sympathies and the press club sympathies on the passing of your mother. I thought that the words that you shared about it were very poignant.
Thank you. It was, she knew I was finishing up this book, and I brought her a copy. I had a copy there before she died. She, all my writing talent came from her. Any talent I have, at least, came from her. So I'm grateful. And it's one of those months where it's the highest of highs, lowest of lows. Everyone's probably had a month like that, where it's the up and the down at the same time.
So David Alpern has a question, and he puts a word in quotes. So watch my air quotes. And it's, how guilty was Don Hewitt, whose excellent 60 Minutes first showed that news can make money, which led to it having to make money.
Yeah.
Competition with entertainment, forcing it to be more entertaining, playing to an audience who have their own tastes and their own politics.
So I love the question, because I love the context that it presents, for this current environment. I don't want to say he's guilty at all, because the industry was going to head in that direction some way, somehow. And Roger Ailes still would have come along and seen this opening to create a conservative alternative on cable in the 1990s. I think that would have happened regardless of 60 Minutes. But I do think 60 Minutes showed this path forward for both in-depth investigative journalism, groundbreaking journalism, but also creating this of a profit center for CBS, NBC, and ABC. Now, if anything, that's profit centers eroded so much. Now it's the morning shows. Now it's Today and GMA that are responsible for most of the profits of the network news divisions. And in some ways, I wonder if we're going to go through the same thing that the print newspaper business has gone through, where the hollowing out of classifieds and obits and those sorts of revenue streams are going to start to dismantle the network news divisions. So that's why I'm hesitant to put it all on Hewitt. because his contribution was so worthwhile. But it's a great point about how that profit motive became front and center. And we see that now, in the cable game as well. You see it in the memos and the emails from Suzanne Scott, who's the CEO of Fox News Media, talking about fact checking about Trump fact checking being bad for business. She's worried about losing subscribers to the Fox streaming service. It's front of mind for her profit line.
That was great. I'm so glad that you agreed to do this. I'm sorry to be, your lowest rating TV appearance this week after you've been.
No, I've enjoyed it. It's so fun to get to talk about this in more detail. And I mentioned earlier, my email address is bstelter@gmail.com. I'd love to keep the conversation going and answer any other questions that come up. You put a book into the world, you have no idea if anybody's going to care. You have no idea if anyone's going to read. And so I appreciate you, Brendan, pulling out some of the lines from it. Some of my favorite lines are the ones that you noticed, which is awesome to hear. I just hope that by the time, so I don't know, I think my kids are hiding somewhere. What I hope is that by the time they are old enough to go out and vote and write books of their own and pay attention to politics, that we have a slightly less broken information environment, a less polluted information environment. We should be able to have vigorous debates about policies, about what to do in the country without it being poisoned by lies, without it being poisoned by voter fraud stories, without it being poisoned by hate speech. And, maybe I'm being naive, maybe I'm fantasizing here, dreaming about the future, but I'd like to think that, a more civil and informative information world is possible. I guess that's why I get up and talk about this stuff every day.
Well, I really appreciate your optimism. I enjoyed the book. Everybody, if you haven't picked it up yet, it's Network of Lies. Get it where books are sold, and also the audiobook's available. So if you're a podcast person, it's a nice alternative to podcast. Consume a lot of information in 11 or so hours. And Brian, last question, just for my own curiosity, how long does it take you to record an 11-hour book by yourself?
It's a great question. It took, what did it take? Took at least 20 hours. I want to say 24 hours. Yeah. It was like 4 days of 6-hour recording sessions to get it down. But I loved the audiobook version the most. I'll tell you why. I was able to add information. Like, I was recording at the end of September. So this thing had already gone to the printing press, and I was able to work in some last minute additions to the audiobook. And also it's just more fun to perform the book, to read it in real time, to add little tidbits here and there, to bring it alive in that way. It's a real joy. I'm just glad that, Rupert Murdoch, he stepped aside 2 weeks ago. All of that's in the book. And now hopefully no more news at Fox for a while, but we'll see.
Well, thank you so much again. And, we'd love to have you back for maybe our regional conference the next time it comes to Long Island, but we could talk about that offline. And, I'll let you get your kids tucked into bed.
Time for bedtime. Thanks, everybody. Great talking with you. Email me anytime. Thanks, y'all.
And thanks, everybody in the audience, for being here.